For discussion, it is agreed the world over that systemic corruption is a major obstacle to stability and economic development in Nigeria. It is estimated that corruption has cost the economy more than $550 billion. The Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, secured 3,175 convictions and recovered 156.276 billion naira in 1 year from May 2023 to May 2024. Just this week, Minister of Finance said the whistleblowing policy has helped the federal government to recover 83 billion naira, $609 million and £5 million in 6 months only. Well, our attention today is on effective anti-corruption fight. Our guest in the studio is Dr. Umar Yakubu, the Executive Director of the Center for Fiscal Transparency and Public Integrity. Thank you for coming on our program.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, to begin the conversation, you've been to the International Anti-Corruption Conference, which was, I think, which happened in June. And you were active participant there. Can you take us through some of the takeaways from that particular conference?
As you know, thank you for inviting me. As you know, corruption is a global problem. Every country is struggling with it, both the developed and underdeveloped and the developing countries. So what is relevant, it is now globalized because you have the issues of money laundering, illicit financial flows, and the use of the private sector players to facilitate corruption activities. So because it's a global problem, the outcomes affect everywhere. You take resources, let's say from Africa, you take to other countries, and you take from other Asian continents, from the continent of Asia, you bring to other countries. They go with their own problems, the problems of human trafficking, drug trafficking, and arms trafficking, and all other security issues. So that's why the world always needs to sit down, and discuss this problem so that it will be a global solution to these problems. The IACC, which is the International Anti-Corruption Conference, has been holding for the past 20 years. The last one in Lithuania actually focused on the emerging threats. And one of the things we have realized that we have to do, we have to strengthen mechanisms to fight corruption.
Okay. Are we particularly ready looking at our own issue? Because there's this thing you said particularly of interest during your workshop. You said that we seem to have success in trying to recover a lot of these funds. But in the first place, it shouldn't have happened in this place. How do we go about this?
Yeah, what the governing tool for every country is the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, that every country uses to implement in its country in combating corruption. And one of the pillars there is asset recovery and management. So when the UNODC, which is the implementing organ of the convention, of the UNCA convention, tells you that you are doing well in some articles or you are not doing well in some articles. So in our last review, most of where we scored the highest was asset recovery. But in our own view from the center, which was a plus to the country, but in our own view from the center, yes, it's good to recover assets, but it means your preventive mechanism is weak or is lacking, is not being done properly. That is why monies are stolen, are taken to other jurisdictions, and hence now you have to work much harder and work so hard to bring back those assets. So these are the problems, and that was the view we looked at it. We need to strengthen the preventive mechanism so that there is no need to activate the asset recovery mechanisms in bringing back funds to the country.
Okay, in your own position as civil society activist, what would you say are the major challenges facing anti-corruption in Nigeria?
Well, there are a lot of challenges, but I think the major thing is that we have to solve the problem of political recruitment in this country. The way people access office, there's too much money involved. That's why we're always quick to blame INEC as a regulator of political parties and the political system. They have to do much more, because as long as we have this present weak political recruitment system, when the political actors get there, they always have to look for ways of recouping their money. And they have other interests other than national interests. So that is the major driver of corruption, especially public sector corruption in Nigeria, that has managed to capture several segments of the economy.
Okay, I believe you must have been following development about the whistleblower policy, and we tend to have made recovery, just as you said. We tend to be very good at making this recovery. What do you make of the policy now that the policy, or there's a bill that is finding its way to the National Assembly to actually address some of these issues concerning the whistleblower and how to protect the whistleblower and how to encourage people to actually take advantage to report corruption, which is actually one of the takeaways, I believe, from your conference.
Yeah, whistleblower policy is just a statement. It doesn't do much. You have just said what you are going to do. We tried the policy way back in 2017, if I'm correct, under the leadership of former Minister of Finance, Dr. Shamsuna Ahmed. But it didn't work. The reason is that for whistleblowing, actually the proper name is public interest disclosure. That's what the modified bill is now. Now, public should have interest in governance. So when they have interest, they should report things that they say are wrong. And when they report, they have to be protected by law and by institutions, to make sure that you are protected from, you know, somebody attacking you, somebody could maim you for reporting all these things, or you could even lose your job, because there are several reports of where people have blown the whistle, but because there was no law to protect them, they ended up losing their job. So that is just one. Secondly, when people blow whistle, there has to be a well-defined incentive, because you can't just blow whistle. It is good for patriotic sakes, but you should also have some level of incentive. In other countries, they give money, sometimes they give you awards, sometimes medals. So we have to establish this. Then thirdly, you have to have a structure. Who do you blow the whistle to? Is it Ministry of Finance? Is it the EFCC? Is it the ICPC? Is it the police? And what aspects are being blown? Is it on security issue? Is it on corruption issue? Because all these are related. Is it on organized crime issue? So where is the harmonizing center that when you blow the whistle, it will now go to the appropriate agency or body so that it will be treated, and the person will be protected during the process of investigation, and also when these cases go to court. And then, of course, lastly, you pay the money or whatever you have agreed. So it's a whole big issue, not to just say we have a policy that we have tried that hasn't worked. We need to have a law. There's an organization, AfriCMIL, they have been doing a lot of advocacy on the need to pass a strong law on whistleblowing mechanism, and it's actually a principle that we have to comply with under the UNCAC Convention about whistleblowing and whistleblower protection.
Now, a situation where we have government important agencies like we have the National Assembly, we have executives, you know, and we need to really address issues of corruption, and we have situations where people turn a blind eye to that. How do we approach this? Because we've heard so many stories of issues of that, and you know, people turning a blind eye on corruption and things like that. How do we encourage the public to get involved in the fight against corruption?
Well, it's not an easy task. I think the first thing to do is for the NOA, National Orientation Agency, and several organizations like the NTA to continue telling people telling them about the cost of corruption. So it's not enough to say somebody took 1 billion naira or 2 billion naira, but you have to put it in an image form to see 2 billion naira is what has deprived you of access to healthcare, deprived you of access to education, and so many other social services that you need for survival. That is one. Two, when you get the citizens engaged, then you find that there will be more incentive to report these things. The second thing, we need to really work on our preventive mechanisms. Now, we easily blame the law enforcement, the anti-corruption agencies, that's the ICPC, the CCB. But let's not forget, we have the Bureau of Public Procurement, where they are doing their work. All the issues on procurement fraud, which is about 70% according to the last data, of all public sector corruption goes through the public procurement. Now, if you solve the problem of public procurement by strengthening that organization and ensuring they do what they are supposed to do, you find that all these things will be reduced. But it is difficult where you have a deluge of money being pilfered out, they will all come and start blaming the law enforcement agencies to recover. So the preventive mechanisms have to be much more effective.
Now, what would you like to see from the whistleblower policy?
Say, the present one?
Yes, the present one. What would you like to see in terms of amendments and in terms of strengthening the policy to make it more effective in addressing issues of corruption?
Very simple. If you want to save costs, you could decide to pass the law and domicile it in the Public Complaints Commission because it's a flow. But of course, you have to have a standard or a measure where all complaints come, where it should be sieved out because there are different types of complaints and different types of public interest. So you need to do that. You pass the law. You could pass within the same law a Whistle Protection Act, something to protect the whistleblower. And these things you need to involve the National Correctional Service, former prisons, because they are those in charge of knowing how to protect these people. Also, law enforcement have to be involved. So the whistleblowing regime involves so many stakeholders that you have to have careful planning to ensure that these things do not die. Then thirdly, you have to have the mechanism for all the recovery of investigation and recovery of the funds that have emanated from any whistle that has been blown.
Okay, there's another issue of corruption again, which is often talked about, the issue of get-rich syndrome, and it's somehow very common among youths. What advice would you give them in trying to avoid or getting involved in issues of corruption?
Well, this advice has to come from the home. Every parent is responsible. That's the first layer. Then the second layer, of course, our places, our social circles, our places of worship, our schools and other associations we belong to. These are the soft issues that we need to build and imbibe. You don't learn these things in school. It's from the home that it starts from, and from the immediate social structure within you, being your school or whatever association you attend to. So there's no other way. Because right now, unfortunately, the whole world is globalized and you have access to information from anywhere from your internet. So children or the youth now have access to see what other people are doing. And might think that the path to wealth is through crime, cybercrime, you know, they do human trafficking, because all prostitution and all those things are what facilitates the human trafficking element. So these are the things that we can only use the soft way of doing it through constant talking, through advocacy, and imbibing the right values in the youth so that they know that there are other ways to progress apart from crime.
Now, Dr. Umar, can you tell us about your agency's contribution to the fight against financial frauds and corruption, and how you're promoting transparency?
Yeah, what we have seen is that, look, we are doing a lot of advocacy, that's civil society, law enforcement, everybody going to schools, talking about do not steal, do not do all those bad things. And we found out from our own research, corruption is not actually reduced. So when you talk about corruption, there are different elements. You can talk about bribery, you can talk about abuse of office, you can talk about nepotism. There are so many aspects. So what we are doing is we have brought out tools to measure governments, you know, how they are reducing corruption. And that starts from transparency. Because the major ingredient for fighting corruption is transparency. Now imagine if all our budgets, all the budgets we have, there was public access to budgets. There was proactive disclosure of all procurement. There was proactive disclosure on our human resources issues. How many people have you recruited? How many staff do you have? How many, you know, how much do you spend on your recruitment? How much do you spend on your capital? Just yesterday in the newspaper, I saw that we don't even, where the most, the cost we use to produce a barrel of oil is the highest in the world. That just came out a few months ago. So all these things, if they were proactively disclosed, you find out, in fact, some of us might not even have anything to do because the citizens know. So what we're doing, we have established the Transparency and Integrity Index, where we're evaluating the proactive disclosure of all categories of information that is supposed to be in the public domain. And we're assessing all more than 600 federal MDAs, or 36 state governments, and of course 774 local governments, where the structure there is very weak. But at the federal level, there's some semblance of compliance with all these principles. And we've been doing it for 4 years, and we're assessing this year again.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Umar Yakubu, the Executive Director of the Center for Fiscal Transparency and Public Integrity. It's a pleasure having
Thank you for inviting me.
I mean,
thank you for
having you on
inviting
the program.
Thank you for inviting.